My name is Amber Thompson, and I am 32 years old. I was racing to my father-in-law Frank's house, car filled with birthday decorations and a homemade cake. After 4 years of what I thought was a happy marriage to Jason, I never expected to find what waited for me behind that unlocked door. 6 months ago, Frank was paralyzed in a construction accident. And we had planned a small celebration for him. But something felt wrong the moment I arrived. The house was silent. Too silent. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from and hit subscribe if you want to hear how I discovered the most shocking betrayal that changed everything. Frank Thompson had been more than just a father-in-law to me since the day we met 5 years ago. At 65, he had the energy of someone 20 years younger, at least until the accident. He worked construction his entire life, building homes across 3 states and raising Jason mostly as a single dad after his wife Linda left when Jason was 12. Linda came back into the picture about a year before our wedding, which Frank had warned me about. Linda always shows up when she thinks there's something in it for her. He told me one evening while we were preparing dinner. I should have paid more attention to his warning. The first time I met Frank, he pulled me into a bear hug and whispered, "You're too good for my son, but I'm glad he found you anyway." We laughed, and that began our special bond. He taught me how to fix things around the house, and I taught him how to cook something other than steak and potatoes. We spent holidays together, went fishing together, and when Jason was busy with work, sometimes Frank and I would catch a baseball game at the stadium. 6 months ago, everything changed. Frank was supervising a residential project when a support beam collapsed. The doctors said he was lucky to be alive, but the spinal damage meant he would likely never walk again. I still remember the hollow look in his eyes when they told him. As a nurse at Memorial Hospital, I had seen that look before, but seeing it on Frank broke my heart. Despite my demanding shifts at the hospital, I rearranged my schedule to help with his care. Jason seemed supportive at first, but as weeks went by, he started making excuses to avoid visiting his father. Linda, on the other hand, suddenly became very interested in Frank's care, which struck me as odd given their troubled history. Linda never liked me. She would make subtle comments about my cooking, my appearance, or how I was playing nurse with Frank. "Shouldn't a professional like you leave the real caregiving to specialists?" she would say with a smile that never reached her eyes. Jason would say nothing, which hurt almost as much as her comments. Last week, we had all agreed to celebrate Frank's birthday together. Nothing fancy. Just cake and maybe watch the game on TV since Frank couldn't go out easily. Jason promised he would be there right after work. That morning, he kissed me goodbye and reminded me to pick up Frank's favorite chocolate cake. Looking back, I should have noticed how he avoided meeting my eyes. At 3 in the afternoon, I received a text from Jason, "Working late. Will be home as soon as I can. Start without me." I was disappointed but not surprised. His absences had become more frequent over the past few months. I texted back asking if I should wait, but received no response. I spent the afternoon decorating our small apartment with streamers and balloons, then carefully frosted the chocolate cake I had baked from scratch. Frank deserved a celebration, even if it wasn't going to be the family gathering we had planned. I packed everything into my car and headed to his house, determined to make his birthday special despite Jason's absence. The neighborhood Frank lived in was quiet, filled with modest single-story homes he could navigate in his wheelchair. His house was the one with the freshly built ramp at the front entrance, a project Jason and I had completed shortly after his release from the hospital. The lawn needed mowing, another task Jason had been postponing. As I parked in the driveway, I noticed there were no other cars. Linda had promised to be there early to help Frank get ready for the small party. My first instinct that something was wrong came when I tried the front door and found it unlocked. Frank was always careful about security, especially since the accident had left him feeling vulnerable. I stood on the porch for a moment, balancing the cake in one hand while holding a bag of decorations in the other. The curtains were drawn, and no sound came from inside. I took a deep breath and pushed the door open, trying to ignore the growing uneasiness in my stomach. "Frank?" I called out as I stepped into the dimly lit living room. No answer. The television was off, and the silence felt heavy, oppressive. I set the cake and decorations down on the coffee table and moved deeper into the house. "Frank, are you here?" "It's Amber." My voice echoed through the empty rooms. The kitchen light was on, and as I entered, I saw a pizza box open on the table. Only 2 slices were missing, and the remaining pizza looked cold and unappetizing. A half-empty glass of water sat beside it. Condensation long dried. It looked like someone had started lunch and then suddenly left. My nursing instincts kicked in and worry flooded through me. Had Frank fallen? Was he unable to call for help? I hurried down the hallway toward his bedroom, my heart pounding. "Frank!" I called again, louder this time. As I approached his bedroom, I finally heard something. A soft sigh. I pushed the door open slowly and found Frank sitting in his wheelchair by the window, staring out at the backyard. He was still wearing his pajamas, his gray hair uncombed. He didn't turn when I entered. "Frank," I said softly, relief washing over me. "You scared me. Didn't you hear me calling?" He turned his wheelchair slowly, and the expression on his face made my heart sink. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he looked defeated in a way I had never seen before, not even in the hospital after the accident. "I heard you," he said, his voice flat. I knelt beside his wheelchair. "What's going on? Where's Linda? She was supposed to be helping you get ready for your birthday dinner." Frank looked away, back toward the window. "They're not coming." "What do you mean?" "Jason said he was working late, but he'll be here later. And Linda promised she would be here all afternoon." I was confused, trying to make sense of the situation. Frank's hands tightened on the armrests of his wheelchair. "They're not coming, Amber. Did something happen? Is everyone okay?" My mind raced through possibilities. An accident? A work emergency? Frank remained silent, and that silence told me more than words could. I reached for my phone, intending to call Jason, when it vibrated in my hand. A video call was coming in from my husband. I felt a surge of relief. Maybe he was just running late and wanted to see how the party was going. "Jason," I said as I answered, forcing cheerfulness into my voice. "We're waiting for you at your dad's. When do you think you'll?" My words died as the image on my screen came into focus. Jason wasn't at work. The background behind him showed a white sand beach, palm trees swaying in the breeze. He was wearing sunglasses and a colorful Hawaiian shirt I had never seen before. And beside him, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and holding a fruity cocktail, was Linda. "Hey, babe," Jason said, his voice loud and slightly slurred. "Surprise." I couldn't speak. My brain couldn't process what I was seeing. "Cat got your tongue." Linda laughed, leaning into the frame. "You should see your face right now." "What? Where are you?" I finally managed to ask, though I already knew the answer. "Hawaii," Jason exclaimed, turning the phone to show the luxury resort behind them. "Mom won this amazing trip in a radio contest. But it was for this week only. We couldn't pass it up." "But today is Frank's birthday," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We had plans." Linda rolled her eyes dramatically. "Oh, please, like he even knows what day it is anymore. Besides, we left him pizza. Did he eat it?" I glanced at Frank, who was watching me with a pained expression, clearly able to hear every word. "You left your paralyzed father alone to go to Hawaii?" I asked Jason, unable to keep the accusation from my voice. Jason's smile faltered slightly. "Come on, Amber. Dad understands. Don't make this a big deal. He's fine, right? Put him on." I was too stunned to move. Frank wheeled himself closer, but stayed out of the camera's view. "Look," Linda chimed in, her voice taking on the condescending tone I knew too well. "We knew you'd make a fuss about it, which is why we didn't tell you. You're always so dramatic about these things." "Dramatic?" I repeated, feeling anger begin to replace shock. "You abandoned a disabled man on his birthday without telling anyone." Jason laughed, and the sound cut through me like a knife. He's not a child, Amber. And you're there now, right? Perfect. You can babysit the cripple while we enjoy some well-deserved vacation time. I gasped at his callous words. This didn't sound like the man I married. Behind him, Linda burst into laughter. She actually believed you were working late. Linda cackled. God, you're so gullible, Amber. Such a good little nurse, always ready to clean up after everyone. Jason at least had the decency to look slightly embarrassed at his mother's words, but he didn't contradict her. We'll bring you back a souvenir, he said with a wink. Don't wait up. We'll be back next week. Before I could respond, Linda grabbed the phone. Have fun with the cripple, she called out. And then the screen went black as she ended the call. I stood frozen, phone still in my hand, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The casual cruelty. The betrayal. Not just to me, but to Frank, who had heard every word. I turned to look at him, tears forming in my eyes. Frank, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. They streamed down my face as I knelt beside Frank's wheelchair, my hands shaking with anger and disbelief. How could they do this to you? I sobbed. On your birthday? And the things they said. I expected Frank to be devastated, but when I looked up at him through my tears, his expression surprised me. He didn't look broken or even particularly sad. Instead, there was a strange calmness in his eyes, mixed with something I couldn't quite identify. Determination, perhaps. Frank, I asked, wiping my tears. Are you okay? He sighed deeply. I've been suspecting something like this might happen. Jason and Linda have been acting strange for weeks now. What do you mean? Frank wheeled himself over to the dresser and pulled out a small notebook from the top drawer. I've been keeping track of things. Conversations that stop when I enter the room. Phone calls Jason takes outside. Linda asking unusual questions about my finances. I took the notebook and flipped through it. Frank had meticulously documented dates, times, and snippets of overheard conversations. The picture it painted was disturbing. I should have said something sooner, Frank continued, but I wanted to be sure before making accusations. And to be honest, I was hoping I was wrong about my own son. I closed the notebook, my mind reeling with implications. Why didn't you tell me you suspected something? Frank looked at me with a sad smile. Because you still loved him, and I didn't want to ruin that without proof. I nodded, understanding his reasoning even as my heart broke anew. There's something else I need to show you, Frank said, his voice taking on a different tone. Something I've been hiding from everyone, including you. I watched in confusion as Frank positioned his wheelchair next to his bed. He placed both hands firmly on the armrests and took a deep breath. Frank, what are you? My words died in my throat as Frank slowly, deliberately pushed himself up from the wheelchair. His movements were stiff and clearly painful, but he stood, supporting himself against the edge of the bed. Oh my God, I whispered, unable to believe what I was seeing. You can walk. Frank grimaced with effort, but remained standing. Not well. And not far. But yes, I've been regaining feeling and movement for the past 2 months. I stared at him in shock. But the doctors said it was unlikely, not impossible. Frank corrected me. The first time I felt something in my legs, I thought I was imagining it. But then it happened again, and I started doing small exercises when I was alone. He carefully lowered himself back into the wheelchair, exhaling with relief as he sat down. Why keep it a secret? I asked, still processing this revelation. This is amazing news. Frank's expression darkened. Because 2 months ago, I overheard Jason and Linda talking about my medical fund. The insurance settlement from the accident. They thought I was napping. But I heard everything. My stomach dropped. What did they say? They were discussing how to get access to the money. Linda suggested having me declared mentally incompetent, saying my depression after the accident was making me unable to manage my own finances. Jason thought that would take too long. He suggested convincing me to add him as a co-signatory on my accounts for convenience. I felt sick. Did you confront them? Frank shook his head. I decided to wait and watch. That's when I started keeping the notebook. And I realized something important. As long as they thought I was completely helpless, they would be less careful around me. They would reveal more. So you pretended to still be fully paralyzed, I said, understanding dawning. Yes, and I've gathered quite a bit of evidence since then. Frank reached under his mattress and pulled out a manila envelope. Inside were bank statements, copies of withdrawal slips, and printed emails. Jason has been embezzling from my medical fund for months, Frank explained, his voice steady despite the pain behind his words. Small amounts at first, but getting larger. And Linda has been helping him. They've taken almost $50,000 so far. I looked through the documents, feeling a fresh wave of betrayal with each page. The most recent withdrawal had been 3 days ago, a large sum that I guessed had funded their Hawaiian getaway. The construction company and insurance paid for my medical expenses and home modifications because the accident was their fault, Frank continued. That money was supposed to cover my ongoing care and physical therapy. Care that Jason and Linda have been skimping on while pocketing the difference. I thought about how often Linda had dismissed the physical therapist early, claiming Frank was too tired to continue. How Jason had switched Frank to cheaper medications without consulting his doctors. It all made sickening sense now. What are we going to do? I asked, still trying to absorb everything. Frank's eyes met mine, and I saw a flash of the strong, determined man I had known before the accident. He straightened in his wheelchair, his jaw set. It's showtime, he said firmly. Let's make them pay. In that moment, something shifted between us. We were no longer just in-law and daughter-in-law bound by marriage to a man who had betrayed us both. We were allies with a common purpose. I'm with you, I said, taking his hand. Every step of the way. Frank squeezed my hand, and for the first time that day, he smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. Because I have a plan, but I can't do it alone. That night, after I had helped Frank with his exercises and served a proper birthday dinner, complete with the chocolate cake I'd brought, we sat at his kitchen table strategizing. The birthday decorations I'd hung seemed almost ironic now, colorful streamers and balloons surrounding us as we plotted our response to betrayal. Show me everything you've documented, I said, pulling out a notebook of my own. Frank opened his journal and spread out the financial documents he'd collected. I started noticing small discrepancies about 4 months ago. The physical therapist mentioned she'd been paid less than usual, but when I asked Jason about it, he said the insurance had reduced coverage. But that wasn't true, I guessed. No. I called the insurance company directly when Jason was at work. My coverage hadn't changed at all. Jason was pocketing the difference. I felt a chill run through me as I remembered conversations with Jason about finances over the past few months. He'd mentioned getting a bonus at work, which had funded our weekend trip to the coast. Had that money actually come from Frank's medical fund? What about Linda? When did she get involved? I asked. Frank flipped to another page in his journal. She's been in on it from the beginning, I think. About 3 months ago, I overheard them arguing about how to split the money. Linda wanted a larger cut since she was the one spending time babysitting me. The casual cruelty of their scheme made my blood boil. I pulled out my phone and opened our joint bank account app. Let me check something, I said, scrolling through recent transactions. Sure enough, there were several large deposits that Jason had vaguely attributed to work bonuses or investment returns. The dates aligned perfectly with withdrawals from Frank's medical fund. They've been laundering the money through your joint account, Frank observed, looking over my shoulder. Not just that, I said, continuing to scroll. Look at these withdrawals to a bank I don't recognize. Frank leaned closer. Offshore account, maybe? That's concerning. This might be more organized than I thought. We continued piecing together the financial trail until well past midnight. The picture that emerged was disturbing. What had started as occasional small thefts had evolved into a systematic scheme to drain Frank's settlement money. And based on emails Frank had managed to glimpse on Jason's laptop, they were planning something bigger. We need legal help, I finally said, rubbing my tired eyes. This is beyond just confronting them. Frank nodded. I have a friend, Rachel Sullivan. She's a lawyer who specializes in elder abuse and financial fraud. We should talk to her. The next morning, I called in sick to the hospital, something I rarely did. Instead of going to work, I met Frank at Rachel's office downtown. He insisted on driving himself, demonstrating that while his mobility was limited, he was far more capable than Jason and Linda believed. Rachel Sullivan was a sharp woman in her 50s with keen eyes that missed nothing. She listened carefully as we laid out our evidence, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but mostly taking detailed notes. This is textbook financial exploitation, she said when we finished. And the fact that it involves medical care makes it even more serious. But we need to be strategic about how we proceed. What do you recommend? Frank asked. First, we need more concrete evidence. Bank records, recorded conversations if possible, witnesses. We need to prove intent. Jason and Linda will be in Hawaii for another 6 days, I said. That gives us time to gather more evidence without them knowing. Rachel nodded approvingly. Perfect. Here's what we need to do. She outlined a comprehensive plan. I would install monitoring software on our shared home computer and check for additional financial records. Frank would continue documenting everything while strategically gathering more information by pretending to be interested in simplifying his finances. Rachel would prepare legal documents and begin the process of securing Frank's assets. Over the next week, our investigation uncovered even more than we had anticipated. I found emails between Jason and Linda discussing not just the medical fund, but also plans to sell Frank's house once he's in a facility. They had already contacted real estate agents for appraisals. The most disturbing discovery came when Frank called Jason's workplace on a pretext and learned that Jason had taken 3 weeks of unpaid leave, not just the 1 week he was supposedly in Hawaii. According to his coworker, Jason had been talking about making a fresh start somewhere else. They're planning to clean me out completely and disappear, Frank said when I shared this information with him. Probably after moving me into the cheapest nursing home they can find. The thought made me physically ill. The man I had married, who I had loved and trusted, was capable of abandoning his own father after stealing everything from him. The monitoring software revealed that they had already set up offshore accounts and were researching countries with no extradition treaties. They had been planning this for over a year, since shortly after Frank's accident. This is actually good for our case, Rachel said when we updated her. It clearly demonstrates premeditation and intent. With Rachel's guidance, we secured Frank's remaining assets, transferring them to new accounts that Jason couldn't access. We gathered affidavits from medical providers who had been underpaid or dismissed. We documented every modification to Frank's care that had compromised his recovery. Through it all, I struggled with the emotional impact of Jason's betrayal. At night, alone in our apartment, I would look at our wedding photos and wonder if any of it had been real. Had he ever loved me, or had I just been useful, a nurse who could help care for his father while he stole from him? Frank became my rock during this time. Despite everything he was going through, he made time to check on me, to remind me that I wasn't at fault. You know what keeps me going? He told me one evening as we reviewed our evidence. Knowing that we're going to stop them from doing this to anyone else. And knowing that I still have family I can count on. You, Amber. His words brought tears to my eyes. In the midst of this terrible situation, we had formed a bond that went beyond in-law relations. We had become family in the truest sense of the word. As the day of Jason and Linda's return approached, we finalized our plan. It wouldn't just be about legal consequences, though those were important. It would be about confrontation. About looking them in the eyes as they realized their scheme had failed. Are you ready for this? Rachel asked us during our final meeting. Frank and I exchanged determined looks. More than ready, Frank replied. It's time they learned you don't mess with a Thompson. I nodded in agreement, feeling stronger than I had in weeks. Let's finish this. Jason and Linda returned from Hawaii tanned and relaxed, bringing cheap souvenir magnets and insincere apologies. I met them at the airport, playing the role of supportive wife despite the rage burning inside me. I'm sorry we left so suddenly, Jason said, putting his arm around me as we walked to the car. Mom won the trip. And we had to use it right away or lose it. You understand, right? I forced a smile. Of course. Frank and I managed just fine. How's the old man? Linda asked, not sounding particularly interested in the answer. The same, I replied, the lie coming easily. He missed you both on his birthday, though. A flash of guilt crossed Jason's face. But Linda just rolled her eyes. He probably didn't even notice. His mind isn't what it used to be. I bit my tongue to keep from defending Frank. Instead, I asked about their trip. Listening to their stories about beaches and luxury hotels paid for with stolen money. The next day, we visited Frank together. I had warned him they were coming, and he was ready. Sitting in his wheelchair looking appropriately frail and dependent. There's the birthday boy, Linda exclaimed with fake cheerfulness as we entered. She placed a tacky Hawaiian snow globe on his side table. Look what we brought you. Thank you, Frank said quietly, playing his part perfectly. How was your trip? Amazing. Jason replied, sitting on the couch instead of going to embrace his father. You would have loved the ocean views, Dad. Maybe someday, Frank said, his eyes meeting mine briefly. The visit continued with Jason and Linda dominating the conversation, barely including Frank. When Linda mentioned needing to discuss Frank's care situation, I saw Jason shoot her a warning look. What about my care? Frank asked, purposely sounding confused and vulnerable. Nothing to worry about, Jason said quickly. Just some paperwork the insurance needs. I'll handle it. You're so good to me, Frank replied, laying it on thick. I don't know what I'd do without you both. After they left, Frank and I shared a knowing look. They're definitely planning something soon, he said. Rachel said the bank flagged another large withdrawal yesterday, I confirmed. They're accelerating their timeline. Over the next few days, I continued gathering evidence while maintaining the pretense of normalcy. It was exhausting. Pretending nothing was wrong when Jason came home each night. He became increasingly secretive, taking phone calls outside and password protecting his laptop. Unaware that the monitoring software was recording everything. Frank continued his performance as well, acting more dependent than he actually was whenever Jason or Linda visited. He even had a close call when Linda arrived unannounced and nearly caught him standing by his kitchen counter. He managed to drop back into his wheelchair just as she entered, claiming he'd been trying to reach a coffee mug. You shouldn't be doing that alone, she scolded, though her concern seemed performative at best. You could fall and hurt yourself. Then where would we be? The subtext was clear. An injured Frank would be more expensive and problematic for their plans. A week after their return, I discovered documents on Jason's laptop about a nursing home called Sunset Valley, located 2 hours away. It had numerous citations for neglect and understaffing, but was significantly cheaper than facilities closer to town. There was an application for Frank's admission with a move-in date just 3 weeks away. When I showed Frank, his face darkened. They're not even trying to find someplace decent, he said quietly. That's not the worst part, I told him, pulling up another document. Look at this power of attorney form. Jason forged your signature. Frank examined the document, his hands shaking slightly. This gives him complete control over all my assets and medical decisions. The magnitude of their betrayal continued to unfold. We learned they had been systematically isolating Frank from his friends, telling people he was too ill for visitors or didn't remember them. They had canceled his subscriptions to fishing magazines and the baseball channel, small cruelties designed to diminish his quality of life while saving money. Despite the pain these discoveries caused, they strengthened our resolve. Each new piece of evidence was carefully documented and shared with Rachel, who was building an airtight legal case. We're almost ready, she told us during a secure call from her office. I've spoken with the prosecutor, and they're prepared to file charges once we confront them. And the timing? Frank asked. This weekend would be ideal. I've arranged for a court order to freeze their accounts as soon as we present our evidence. We set the date for Saturday afternoon. Rachel would arrive with the necessary legal documents, and we invited Jason's younger sister Megan to be present as a witness. Megan had been living out of state and was unaware of the full situation, though she had been concerned about the lack of communication from her father. The night before our planned confrontation, Jason nearly discovered our evidence folder when he came home early and found me at the computer. I managed to close the files just in time, but his suspicion was obvious. "What were you doing?" he asked, his tone casual but his eyes sharp. "Just checking some work schedules," I lied, heart pounding. "The hospital is revising next month's rotation." He seemed to accept this explanation, but later I caught him looking through my bag when he thought I was in the shower. The trust between us had completely disintegrated, though only I knew exactly why. That night, as we lay in bed with a chasm of secrets between us, Jason reached for my hand. "I've been thinking," he said, staring at the ceiling. "Maybe we should take a trip somewhere. Just the two of us. Get away for a while." I kept my voice neutral. "What about your dad? We can't leave him alone. Mom can watch him. Or we could hire someone temporarily." I recognized this for what it was now that I understood their plan. They wanted me out of the way while they moved Frank to Sunset Valley. "Let me check my work schedule," I said, buying time. "Maybe next month." "Sure," Jason replied, but I could feel his tension. He knew something wasn't right but couldn't identify what. As I pretended to fall asleep beside my husband, I realized this would be our last night together as a married couple. Tomorrow, everything would change. The thought brought not sadness, but relief. I was ready to end this charade and face the truth, no matter how painful. Frank texted me late that night. "Can't sleep. Nervous about tomorrow." I replied, "Me too. But we're doing the right thing." His response was immediate. "I know. Thank you for standing by me. See you tomorrow." Those simple words gave me strength. Whatever happened next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. Saturday arrived with a tension that hung in the air like an approaching storm. I had told Jason we needed to meet at Frank's house to discuss his care, a pretense he readily accepted since it aligned with his own plans. Linda arrived first, wearing an expensive new outfit I recognized from her social media posts about their Hawaii trip. "I thought this was just a quick check-in," she said, eyeing the formal table setting I had arranged in Frank's dining room. "Frank wanted to make it nice," I explained. "He doesn't get many chances to host anymore." She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Frank sat at the head of the table in his wheelchair, looking appropriately frail, but with an alert gleam in his eyes that Linda failed to notice. Jason arrived next, kissing me on the cheek with a distracted air. "Is Megan here yet?" he asked, noticing the extra place settings. "She's on her way," I confirmed. "And a few others." "Others?" Linda's voice sharpened. "Who else is coming to this family meeting?" Before I could answer, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Rachel Sullivan standing there in a professional suit, legal briefcase in hand. Behind her was Dr. Peterson, Frank's primary physician, and Emily Winters, the physical therapist who had been abruptly dismissed 3 months ago. "What is this?" Jason demanded as they entered. "Dad doesn't have any appointments today." "They're here at my invitation," Frank said, his voice stronger than Jason or Linda had heard it in months. The doorbell rang again. And this time it was Megan, Jason's sister. She embraced Frank warmly before giving Jason a confused look. "What's going on?" "Your message said Dad needed to discuss his care options," she said to her brother. "That's what I thought too," Jason replied, shooting me an accusatory glance. Once everyone was seated around the table, an uncomfortable silence fell. Linda broke it first. "Well, this is cozy, but some of us have plans today. Could we get to the point?" Frank cleared his throat. "Yes, let's do that." He looked around the table, his gaze finally settling on his son. "Jason, would you like to tell everyone about Sunset Valley?" Jason's face paled. "What?" "The nursing home. The one you've already filled out paperwork for, planning to move me there in 3 weeks," Frank continued, his voice steady. "Or perhaps you'd prefer to explain the power of attorney document with my forged signature." Linda jumped in quickly. Frank, you're confused. We haven't decided on any facility yet. We're just exploring options for when you need more care than we can provide at home. I'm not confused, Linda, Frank replied firmly. In fact, I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months. Rachel Sullivan opened her briefcase and began laying out documents on the table. Mr. Thompson asked me to review some financial matters that concerned him. What I found was alarming. Who is this? Linda demanded, looking at me. Amber, what have you done? This is Rachel Sullivan, my attorney, Frank answered before I could speak. And she's discovered quite a pattern of financial fraud. Jason stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. Dad, you're not well. You've been depressed since the accident. And Amber is taking advantage of your mental state to turn you against us. Dr. Peterson spoke up then. Actually, Mr. Thompson's mental state is excellent. I evaluated him thoroughly last week. His cognitive function is completely unimpaired. Last week, Linda repeated, her eyes narrowing. We weren't informed of any appointment. That was intentional, I said. Finally speaking up. Just like you intentionally didn't inform me about your Hawaii trip until you were already there. Megan looked bewildered. Hawaii? You told me you couldn't visit Dad on his birthday because you were working overtime, Jason. The room grew tense as Rachel continued laying out documents. Bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from Frank's accounts, copies of the forged power of attorney, emails between Jason and Linda discussing their plans. These are private family matters, Linda insisted, trying to gather the papers. This is none of your business. Financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult is very much my business. Rachel replied calmly, moving the documents out of Linda's reach. As is insurance fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. Jason's face had gone from pale to flushed with anger. Dad, you don't understand. We were trying to protect you, to make sure your money lasted through your care. By stealing from me, Frank asked quietly. By planning to abandon me in a substandard facility with multiple safety violations. That's not fair, Linda interjected. Sunset Valley is perfectly adequate. So you admit you were planning to move him there, I said, without discussing it with him first. Linda realized her mistake too late and fell silent. Emily Winters, the physical therapist, spoke next. Mr. Thompson was making excellent progress in his rehabilitation before my services were terminated. According to the insurance, I was becoming too expensive. I never authorized ending your services, Frank said. In fact, I specifically requested more sessions. Dr. Peterson nodded. The reduction in physical therapy was against my medical recommendation as well. Jason looked desperately around the table, seeking an ally and finding none. This is all a misunderstanding. Dad, we were trying to help you. Help me, Frank repeated, his voice rising slightly. By stealing $50,000 from my medical fund? By forging my signature? By lying to my friends and telling them I didn't want visitors? Megan gasped. Jason, tell me this isn't true. Jason's face hardened. You don't understand the burden of caring for him. Day after day, dealing with a man who can't even stand up for himself anymore. Actually, Frank said, a new strength entering his voice, that's where you're wrong. Every eye in the room watched in shock as Frank placed his hands on the armrests of his wheelchair and slowly, deliberately pushed himself to a standing position. He was unsteady but unmistakably on his feet. Linda's cocktail glass slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. That's impossible, she whispered. I've been regaining function for 2 months, Frank said, carefully balancing himself with one hand on the table. My doctors say with continued proper therapy, I could be walking with just a cane within a year. Proper therapy, I emphasized, which you've been denying him while pocketing the money. Jason stared at his father in disbelief. You've been faking? This whole time? No, Jason. I've been healing. Something you would have noticed if you'd spent any time actually caring for me instead of stealing from me. The room fell silent as the full impact of Frank's words and actions sank in. Megan had tears streaming down her face. Whether from joy at her father's improvement or horror at her brother's betrayal, it wasn't clear. Jason's shock quickly turned to desperation. "Mom put me up to it," he blurted out, pointing at Linda. "She said we deserved the money after everything we'd done for him." Linda's face contorted with rage. "You miserable coward. It was your idea to forge the power of attorney. Only because you said we needed to act fast before he spent it all on experimental treatments," Jason shot back. Their unified front collapsed completely as they turned on each other, each trying to minimize their own culpability while maximizing the others. "I think we've heard enough," Rachel said, gathering her documents. "The police and prosecutor have already been briefed. They're waiting for my call." "Police?" Linda repeated, her voice suddenly small. "Yes," Frank confirmed. "What you've done isn't just a family matter. It's criminal fraud." "Dad, please," Jason begged, his arrogance replaced by fear. "We can work this out. I'll pay back every cent." "It's too late for that," Frank replied, the pain evident in his voice despite his resolved expression. "You didn't just steal my money, Jason. You betrayed my trust. You abandoned me when I needed you most." "And you mocked him," I added, unable to contain my anger any longer. "You called him a cripple while you lounged on a beach bought with his stolen money." Megan stood up, her expression hardened. "I can't believe what I'm hearing. Our father raised us alone after you left, Linda. He worked himself to exhaustion to give us everything we needed. And this is how you repay him?" Linda had no response. Her earlier bravado completely evaporated. Frank slowly sat back in his wheelchair, the effort of standing having taken its toll. "I've made my decision. Rachel will be calling the authorities now. Whatever happens next is out of my hands." "You can't do this," Linda hissed. "We're family." "Family doesn't do what you did," Frank replied simply. "Amber has been more family to me in these past months than either of you have been in years." As Rachel stepped outside to make her call, Jason made one last desperate appeal to me. "Amber, please. You're my wife. You have to stand by me." I removed my wedding ring and placed it on the table between us. "No, Jason. That ended the moment you laughed about abandoning your father and called him a cripple. Consider this my divorce notice." The sound of police sirens in the distance signaled the end of their scheme and the beginning of accountability. As officers entered the house, reading Jason and Linda their rights, I stood beside Frank, my hand on his shoulder. Despite everything, there was a sense of relief in finally bringing the truth to light. The weeks following the confrontation were both challenging and liberating. Jason and Linda were arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and financial exploitation. They were released on bail pending trial, but restraining orders kept them away from both Frank and me. I moved out of the apartment Jason and I had shared, taking only my personal belongings and leaving behind anything we had purchased together. Frank insisted I stay in his guest room until I found a place of my own. "This house is too big for just me anyway," he said as he helped me arrange my things, moving slowly but steadily with the aid of his walker. Legal proceedings moved forward methodically. Rachel proved to be not just a skilled attorney, but a compassionate advocate, guiding us through each step of the process. The evidence against Jason and Linda was overwhelming, and their attempts to blame each other only strengthened the prosecution's case. Frank's siblings rallied around him once they learned the truth. His brother David flew in from Arizona and stayed for 2 weeks, helping with house repairs and accompanying Frank to physical therapy sessions. His sister Margaret organized a belated birthday celebration, filling the house with the friends Jason and Linda had worked so hard to keep away. "I should have checked on you more often," David told Frank during his visit. "I knew something felt off when Linda suddenly reappeared in your life." "You couldn't have known," Frank assured him. "They were careful. And I didn't want to believe it myself at first." For me, the divorce process brought both pain and clarity. Each document I signed, each legal meeting I attended, reminded me of how thoroughly I had been deceived. Yet with each step, I also felt lighter, as if shedding a burden I hadn't fully recognized I was carrying. Frank's recovery accelerated once he was able to resume proper physical therapy. Emily Winters returned as his therapist, And her expertise, combined with Frank's determination, led to remarkable progress. Within 3 months, he was walking short distances with just a cane. The doctors were wrong about your prognosis, I told him one afternoon as we returned from a therapy session. Frank smiled. They underestimated my stubbornness. And maybe my motivation too. Nothing makes you want to stand on your own 2 feet like discovering people are taking advantage of you. The first time Frank walked unassisted from his bedroom to the kitchen, we celebrated as if he'd run a marathon. Small victories became treasured moments as we both rebuilt our lives. My nursing colleagues were supportive throughout the ordeal. Many brought meals during those first difficult weeks, and my supervisor adjusted my schedule to accommodate court dates and legal meetings. Working in healthcare had taught me about human resilience, but living through this experience gave that knowledge new depth. 6 months after the confrontation, Jason and Linda accepted plea deals rather than face trial. The terms included significant restitution payments, community service, and probation. Neither would serve jail time, a fact that initially disappointed me until Frank shared his perspective. The important thing is they can't do this to anyone else, he said. And honestly, seeing them in prison wouldn't heal what's been broken. His wisdom humbled me. Despite everything he had endured, Frank refused to be consumed by bitterness. Instead, he focused on recovery and rebuilding. My divorce was finalized around the same time. Jason didn't contest any of my requests, perhaps recognizing he had already lost far more than material possessions. The last time I saw him was in the courthouse hallway after signing the final papers. He looked diminished somehow. The confident charm that had once attracted me now revealed as the shallow facade it had always been. I'm sorry, he said simply as I walked past. I paused but didn't turn around. I know, but it's not enough. Those were the last words we exchanged. With legal matters settled, Frank and I established new traditions and rhythms. Sunday dinners became a regular event, often including Megan and her family or Frank's siblings when they visited. Frank resumed his woodworking hobby, starting with small projects and gradually taking on more complex ones as his strength returned. I discovered a passion for gardening, transforming Frank's neglected backyard into a thriving space where we often enjoyed morning coffee. When I finally found an apartment of my own, Frank helped me move in, proudly carrying smaller boxes without his cane. The building was just a few blocks from his house, close enough for regular visits, but far enough to give us both independence. You know, he said as we unpacked my kitchen items, I never thanked you properly. For what? I asked, unwrapping a coffee mug. For believing me. For standing by me when my own son wouldn't. I set down the mug and hugged him tightly. You would have done the same for me. And I knew with absolute certainty that he would have. 1 year after the confrontation, we held a proper celebration for Frank's birthday. The house was filled with friends and family, laughter replacing the silence that had haunted it the year before. Frank walked around unassisted, proudly showing off his latest woodworking projects and sharing stories. During a quiet moment on the porch, away from the festivities, Frank turned to me. I've been thinking about what good came from all this. Good? I asked, surprised. He nodded. I reconnected with people I'd lost touch with. I discovered strengths I didn't know I had. And most importantly, I learned who my real family is. He squeezed my hand. Blood doesn't always make family, Amber. Sometimes family is who stands by you when everything falls apart. His words brought tears to my eyes, not from sadness, but from recognition of a profound truth. The betrayal we had experienced was devastating, but it hadn't destroyed us. Instead, it had revealed the authentic bonds that transcend legal definitions of family. As we rejoined the party, I watched Frank laughing with his brother, his eyes bright with life and purpose. I thought about how far we'd both come, not just physically in Frank's case, but emotionally and spiritually. We had faced the worst kind of betrayal and emerged not just surviving but thriving. The road to healing hadn't been straight or easy. There were still difficult days, moments when the pain of betrayal felt fresh again. But those moments became less frequent as we built new memories and connections to replace what had been lost. If there was a lesson in everything we had experienced, perhaps it was this. True strength isn't about never falling, but about how you rise after being knocked down. Frank had literally learned to stand again. But we had both learned to stand up for ourselves in ways that mattered even more. What happened to us could have left us bitter and mistrustful. Instead, it taught us to recognize genuine care and connection when we found it, to value honesty above comfortable illusions, and to trust our own perceptions even when others tried to undermine them. You know what I'm grateful for today? Frank said as we cut his birthday cake, surrounded by people who truly cared for him. What's that? I asked. He smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. That sometimes life's worst moments lead to the best ones, if you're brave enough to keep going. As I looked around at the community we had built, I couldn't help but agree. We had not just survived betrayal, we had created something beautiful in its aftermath. Have you ever had to rebuild your life after a betrayal? How did you find the strength to move forward? Please share your experiences in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, consider subscribing and sharing it with someone who might need to hear that healing is possible even after the deepest wounds. Thank you for listening to our journey. And remember that you deserve people who stand by you, not those who stand in your way.